Hi, this is Cora Stack again, Dr. Stack. Yeah, what I was trying to say was was the whole focus on Mr. McGregor really a decoy. Was it deliberate or was it, was it a media deliberate or otherwise? It's very cynical if it was a media ploy, a decoy. So did the media know behind the scenes really what was going on, or perhaps it wasn't, but was just a story? So why did the media public assume it was all about Mr. Conor McGregor? Was it because he's famous, very wealthy, high profile, easy to attach a story, makes a great story? Was he a convenient public focal point? Decoy. Was his name simply the surface explanation that made sense to people, or detracted from what was really going on? Or was that assumption incomplete? Could the real impact have fallen on a researcher instead of a celebrity? It is possible the pressures, administrative, procedural, legal and reputational, were not directed at a public figure, but at someone who had far less, of these resources of protection or ability to defend themselves. Could a person, for example, have been a researcher like myself, an academic, a very serious academic, not high profile, but very, very serious academic, very high level academic, a researcher, a person who submitted, unfortunately, detailed governance analysis and protective disclosures? So, as a researcher working on material of a whistleblowing nature, was I treated or regarded as a whistleblower by the system? This is the question. My work examined, unfortunately, issues such as governance, omissions, policy gaps and institutional accountabilities. And although I approached this purely as an academic researcher, the nature of the findings may have positioned me in the perception of institutions as a whistleblower. Even without a formal designation, the patterns of treatment I experienced for months and years since then resembled those often reported by individuals who raise inconvenient or sensitive information. This is not a claim, it's a question, but I'm usually very much on the money. I'm very good at patterns. Did the system react to the content of my research rather than to me as a person? I think it is the second. Could my 2014 research, called the Implementation of the Protective Disclosures Act 2014, 2000 and Acts of Omission research paper, have triggered reactions nobody recognised at the time and well beyond the implications that I ever would have expected for myself, or the severe alleged retaliation? Did the paper raise issues that were politically sensitive? Absolutely. Did it coincide with election cycles? It did coincide with reform that was directed by the EU, that we had to improve our accountability in our protective disclosure letters, which we unfortunately did the exact opposite. It just had the appearance of it, but in fact we diluted it hugely. Did it highlight vulnerabilities that institutions prefer not to address? Absolutely. Could this explain why for months and years ordinary process around me became exceptionally impossible? Why did so many barriers arise over those following months and years? Why did court dates repeatedly collapse? Why were hearings impossible to progress? Why were reports I made about wrongdoings against me to oversight bodies always against me when I knew my facts inside out? Why did newspapers publish narratives that I could not answer and never approach me from my side or for the truth? Why were costs awarded against me in a recent court case despite being unrepresented, and where, critically, that paper was an essential exhibit where there was never a mention of it? So that judge must have known that was a legal paper and there wasn't a mention of it in the judgment, and it was critical to, I would say, the judgment decision against me. This is a whistleblower we've got to really hit her big time for daring to challenge the institutions. I mean, it was absolutely horrific form of penalisation to penalise me with costs, again, because there was a researcher implicit, and furthermore, not to even mention it in the judgment that that paper was a critical exhibit which the other side sought to try and get me to withdraw at the latest hour, knowing it was absolutely legal. But they didn't realise, of course, that the said judge is very closely associated, allegedly, with Mr. Harris and Mrs. Fitzgerald, who gave a donation. So there was a huge conflict of interest issue. This was a matter raised seriously by an excellent judge, Judge Michael Huygens, recently against the sisters. The only thing that he found against him was the conflict of interest issue, which raised very serious questions, allegedly, about why said judge took this case, given his very strong relationships, allegedly, with Mrs. Fitzgerald and the Harris family, including representing Mr. Harris in a very senior role in a previous position, allegedly. So were the costs? So were the costs punitive because I was seen by this judge as a whistleblower on the state on this thing, which in fact was just research from my perspective? Why did basic administrative processes repeatedly break me down over the years? Were these coincidences, or were there questions worth examining more carefully? A pattern of institutional retaliation for exposing wrongdoing in the public interest, not realising it was absolutely legal. Was it easier for institutions and for the public to attach a story to a global celebrity and to acknowledge what might have been happening to an academic researcher raising uncomfortable issues, rather than acknowledge, is it possible the spotlight was pointed at McGregor while the pressure was felt by somebody entirely different? After months of confusion, setbacks and unanswered questions, does the pattern now make more sense? When the timeline is laid out, the research, the disclosures, the political climate, the administrative obstacles, the legal difficulties, do the pieces align in a way that never did at the time? Is it possible that the real issue was never Conor McGregor, but the implications of research that touched on institutional vulnerabilities, using very diplomatic language? Closing. If a system directs public attention towards a celebrity, but the real impact falls on a researcher that engaged partly in research of a whistleblowing nature, what does that reveal about how power operates, and about what is truly at risk when difficult questions are asked? So that's putting it very mildly about the years of whistleblowing retaliation that I've been subjected to, not realising, of course, that almost every process I entered to almost had an insider saying this person is the whistleblower and has to be treated as such. So it is shocking, really, when it all adds up. And it absolutely was the worst form of penalisation any person since the foundation of the state has been subjected to, because it was incredible psychological torture. And I didn't simply realise that the reason for all this was really a code going around, perhaps the courts, perhaps the Gardaí, perhaps a lot of institutions that positioned me as a whistleblower and then tried to portray me as some kind of an unstable person, who, when I had a false arrest and all of that. So they were trying to stitch me up with being some kind of a nutcase so that it would agree with their false narrative. So they stitched me up in every possible way. So my feeling is that all of this court case, all this penalisation, all of this costs, all the media, they were all in it together, and the idea was to penalise a whistleblower. And it's 10 times worse than what happened to Sergeant McCabe. It's no question, because he had Michael McDougall, and they knew I didn't have anybody, and that's what they were doing. And I cannot describe. I mean, McCabe had, and my work was dedicated to the Limerick whistleblowers and others, but it was horrific what was done to me. I mean, the torture, the psychological torture, the gaslighting, the years and years of gaslighting and institutional betrayal that was done to me, and all because I wrote research of a whistleblowing nature at one point in my career. And since then, I've written a huge amount of papers, and now I'm in a league that I never expected I've been in, from kind of fighting the system, wondering, why is this going on? Why is this going against me? Why is this going against me? What's wrong with this? Why is everything going against me? Like, when I've done all this research and I know my stuff and I'm being gaslit here, there, and everywhere. What's going on? So as a result of it, my research profile is shot up sky high. I mean, I won't say how high it is now using data analytics. It's absolutely gobsmacking, but it's a big price to pay because I haven't seen my own children for 7 years, and of course this definitely was part of it. Every possible way I could be psychologically tortured, it was done, and I think it was done because they couldn't really get at McCabe, and it was me. A whistleblower had to be silenced in every way. But to think the government would collude with this, and a judge would collude with this, is extraordinary penalisation, and it beggars belief, lack of the ethics of these people. I mean, I can see the narcissistic sociopathic elements to all of it, and it's real dark, and that's why I'm saying we need to move to an arbitration first system, because we're making it worse in the adversarial system. In almost every dispute, it really is a black and white situation where there's no equality of arms. So really looking at it from a global perspective, unless we move dispute resolution into an arbitration first system, I think this is only the rot, as people are calling it, is going to get worse. So that's where I see the fixing and the healing. But my God, did I suffer to get to the solution? I really did. I really suffered the humiliation, the absolute torture over many years, because I did the research. But look at the end of it. I'm one of these, a global scholar now in the top 1% worldwide, read by the best universities in the world, and in a league I never thought of by. And I've written so many papers. I suppose as a result of the trauma, sometimes it's I did years of research going into tribunals and things like that, thinking, God, I had it all, I knew it all, and I was gaslit because I was unrepresented. And sure, I've written a great paper about the illusion of justice for the unrepresented. It's global, and the gaslighting is unbelievable by the judiciary. Not all. Look at Michael Higgins there, straight as a die, and James Noonan straight as a die. So, but there's a huge amount of gaslighting. You see, there's no when there's no oversight. There's no oversight. It's as I said, I have a great paper, a lot of people are reading, but the big paper that people are reading is the access to justice and the arbitration. So they're really the access to justice being an illusion for the unrepresented, and it's absolutely clear, and it's a global problem. So it's resonating with a huge amount of people worldwide, as is the papers in arbitration and protective disclosures. I mean, it's all linked, and so it's huge. It's a huge. I've hit major global issues in a huge way, and the disrespect that I got in the courts from so many people. And you see, because you haven't the label of solicitor, you couldn't possibly be like 20 times better than any solicitor or even a judge. They couldn't, their ego wouldn't let them allow them accept that a lay litigant would be so much more in a league that they'd never reach. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but it's the disrespect. But not all judges are that disrespectful, because Noonan described me in a hearing, a final hearing in a particular case, the High Court, is unquestionably a brilliant woman. So there's a judge now who wasn't in a narcissistic, sociopathic league at all, and he's always for transparency and accountability. He won and then Justice Michael Higgins is a fantastic judge, shows me as well. So you can't put them all in the same, certainly, but the judge that I was up against took an awful turn, and I'm still trying to figure out now, was he colluding with Brian Quegan, or which one of them was directing which, or was there somebody else behind the scene? Because he switched personalities, switched personalities, and I'd seen it before, because I studied narcissistic sociopathy and cluster B spectrum conditions for many years, so I could see the switching. Oh, it's scary. Like one day it's one person, another day it's like a different person in a different language, a judgment that was completely twisted against me. And I was so gaslit. It was unbelievable. It was full of gaslighting. I have to speak out about it because the press have lied, absolutely lied, and distorted the truth. And it was to benefit their agenda, which was to their paymasters and to get Catherine Connolly. And I'm not saying that making any allegations against Catherine Connolly, but it certainly was to get her elected. But it was the way it was done. It was not that, nothing wrong with her getting elected, but it's the way she was elected and the way the press manipulated, along with the judge allegedly, to get her elected, and with the collusion of senior members of the government. That's the only way I can see it, and it's all alleged.